All right, I'm here with Miss Rita Lorraine Hubbard. She is an award-winning children's author and just wrote our newest children's book, The Making of a Hero, 6 more stories of Medal of Honor recipients, which is what this design challenge is sort of wrapped around in its own way. We will be sending out copies of those. But Miss Rita, our students in this design challenge, they're going to have multiple performance tasks that they're going to have to make their way through. And one of them will be to write a short, not a whole children's book, right? But write a short story on a Medal of Honor recipient or Space Medal of Honor recipient of their choice that they're going to be doing some research on. So I wanted to introduce them to our award-winning children's author, Miss Rita here, and just, kind of talk to them a little bit about how you started writing. What's some of your process that you go through? Because they're going to have to do research. They're going to have to do, a little bit of background digging on some of these recipients to figure out what they want to include in their story. So how did you get started, Miss Rita?
I got started when I was 5 years old. My older sister used to come home and show me her spelling words. I would write them on the wall. I know you're not supposed to do that, but I would make stories out of them. And from then on, I was always writing a story on my writing paper. When I was in first grade, I would write a story, fold it up, staple it, and that was my book. So that's how I got started. A little later on, of course, I got guidance from my parents, from my teacher, and I started deciding what did I love, what did I want to write about, what was my passion. And I would do stories from there, share them with my friends to get their opinions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and what really spoke to you as a child, some of these stories? Because, some of these students may not be big readers. We want them to be big readers, right? We want them to latch onto stories that are important to them. But what interested you?
Well, actually, I'm a big animal lover. So, in the beginning, animal stories interested me. I graduated from there to poetry, and I graduated from there to African American history. That was over a number of years, but that's how I sort of evolved into a children's book writer. I do a lot of African American history, which does require a lot of research, and I know we're going to talk about that today. But I also still have animal stories. I've got one that I'm almost finished with that I'm waiting to launch on the world.
Oh, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are some of the steps that you go through when you're, generating ideas for stories? What are some of these steps? Is it just a scratch paper you start with? What are some of the steps that you go through? Because our students are going to have to be working together.
Right.
And, this challenge may involve 2, 3, 4 students where they're working collaboratively. And one may be the storyteller and one may be great as being an illustrator on it.
Yes.
What are some of the steps that you walk through as a children's book author that could maybe help them as they start to plan out what they want to include in their story on their Medal of Honor recipient or Space Medal of Honor recipient?
Okay, if we can, let's do this in 2 parts.
Sure.
I'll start first with how I do it as an individual. So I may hear a word, I may see a historical marker, and when something piques my interest, the first thing I do is decide, what am I writing about? What is this about? Is it about a woman? Is it about, like these students, space? What is it going to be about? And the next thing I do is decide what is the heart of the story. Let's say I'm writing about space. So, what is the heart of the story? Is it that it takes courage to go into space? And then the next thing I would do is decide, what message am I trying to convey? I know it's about space, I know it's about the courage it takes, but the message I may want to convey is, all of us, every human, has some degree of courage inside them, so we're all capable of doing something courageous and great. And the last thing, which may be the biggest thing, is I decide, who am I writing for? Am I writing for children, upper elementary, middle school, high school, adults? Who you're writing for, so that you can accommodate them vocabulary wise.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I do it individually.
So it's gathering the story
Yes.
and keeping in mind who your audience is.
Yes.
sometimes we may write things for us. That could be your own journal.
Yes.
But if we're writing for someone else, it's keeping in mind who your audience is, things that they're interested in, bringing it down to their level. You can still communicate the same message, right?
Right, the same message, just on their level. And what you're really wanting them to leave with. When they read your story, what are they leaving with? Are they leaving with something like, we all have courage? Or are they leaving with something like, find what your passion is, you'll find you have courage in that area, and move on. Now, I keep using courage, but that's just one example.
Not only is 2026 America 250, but 2026 is the 40th anniversary of the shuttle tragedy. And so Miss Rita has written a book for us, which we will be releasing in 2026 on Ronald McNair, the only African American on the shuttle, and just telling his such unique story.
Yes.
And did you have that in mind when you were writing his story?
Every bit of it. Who he was. I knew what my subject was, what the heart of the story was, which is It's Possible. I think that's the title we settled on. It's possible. Whatever it is, it's possible. And just the process that he went through, going from being a very poor young man with very few resources to being one of those astronauts on the space shuttle. An amazing story.
Yeah. And it's possible to complete this design challenge. You can do this, right, Ms. Rita?
Absolutely.
So, okay, we've walked a little bit through your process of thinking it through, who your audience is, what kind of the story you want to capture. What are some of the more technical things? I mean, are you writing this down on legal pad? Are you at your computer? What are some of those things? Because, our students are going to be collaborating. They do have, Google Docs and the things they can collaborate on. How important is it for maybe one student to kind of gather ideas, or maybe they all kind of do you go through the process of creating a kind of a little bit of a framework and then going from there? What's your process?
If I were working with a team, my first process, of course, I have to go back to identifying what it is or who it is you're writing about, making sure everybody on that team understands that's what we're writing about. So once you get that cemented in everyone's mind and you've got your team together, you need to probably come up with some rules immediately. And one of the rules is that once you begin brainstorming, everybody's idea is a good idea. You may not be able to act on everyone's idea, but you don't want anyone to feel that stupid or shut out or brushed aside because of the idea they came up with. So you're laying down those rules of writing as a team. And then after that, probably you want to brainstorm, but put a time limit on your brainstorming. For instance, if they have a month to write this, you don't still want to be brainstorming in week 2. You want to put some kind of a time limit on it. And once you do that, then you want to designate somebody that's going to take the notes. You want them to be happy about their designation, not feel imposed upon, but someone who takes good notes and who can kind of use their imagination as they're putting these notes down. Then you can begin the writing process together. Maybe somebody's a little bit better at composing sentences or like you said, doing the framework. If your project is going to take you into the libraries, please, I'm asking, and I'm not a librarian, make friends with your local librarians because they really do look out for you. If you're talking about a certain aspect of space, they're going to be watching for books, articles, events, like this event coming up in January. They're going to be looking for it or looking out for it just for you. Yeah. So make friends with the librarians. Find somewhere quiet and somewhere isolated so that you and your group can sit down together and do the writing. You may want only one person to do the writing, but when the group reconvenes, Someone can read out the what has been written aloud, offer their suggestions, and actually, when you give everyone a part, it flows more more smoothly, I think.
Yeah,
Hmm.
awesome. And there may be some students that are better at illustration, and
Yes,
maybe they want to
absolutely.
help communicate the story through illustration. And by seeing what the script is, right, the
Yes,
manuscript, then maybe once some illustrations come out, there can be some editing of the script too, because maybe you don't
yes,
need that in the words, and can it just be depicted in the illustration? So lots of cool opportunities to collaborate on this. And I just think back with what we did with both of these children's books.
yes,
You wrote, I mean, we both sat down, talked about what we wanted in this, especially for the making of the hero book too, walking around our gallery, seeing what we have,
yes.
how that's conveyed through our exhibits. But then you did a lot of the research. You would send me, drafts of it. We would go through it. We would talk about it. And, there were maybe some things that we needed on our end said, or some things that you wanted to
Right.
convey. And so it was back and forth. And then obviously it would go to a publisher. And then there were more illustration things that we had to work through, all of those things. So all of those, I mean, that's real life stuff that
Yes, it
these
is.
students are going to have to be doing too in their small group. Is there anything else that?
Yeah, I want to I'm glad you asked. Revision is a
Hmm.
good thing. After you present to the whole group what you've written, if you're the writer, um, and there are suggestions for revisions. Don't take that the wrong way. That's actually a good thing. One other good thing is having someone read what you've written aloud because the brain is so quick that if you're writing something, you could leave out a word or not even finish a sentence, and your brain may not notice that right away because it knows what you were going to say.
Mhm.
So if someone reads it out loud, or even if you sit at a computer, if you have a word program that reads aloud, let your computer read to you, and you will see how smoothly your story or everyone's story reads. That's an important part of this process is feedback and actually hearing the words whomever have written out loud, not just in your mind, but out loud.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I can't wait to see what our students come up with this.
Me
They
too.
they've got a lot to pick from. There are over 3,500 Medal of Honor recipients. There are roughly, I think it's 30 Space Medal of Honor recipients that they
Yes,
can pick from. So, with this design challenge, there are other components, right? But again, how can we tell their stories in different mediums in different ways? One, they're just, creating a finger puppet. They are writing a short little story about their recipient, or the older crew may be doing a graphic novel. And then they will be doing a little videography of it, telling the story through their videos of their recipient. So we wanted to introduce these different performance tasks, but introduce how do we tell these stories in different ways. We
yes,
wanted to expose students to this because some students, they just don't know that they're good writers.
right,
And maybe they've never been challenged to do that. Some students don't know that they're actually good researchers. And you can look into things and care about history. It's not just history. These are people's real stories. What can we
absolutely.
pull from those threads along the way? And so we just want to expose students to these ordinary individuals that just did extraordinary things. I mean, we were talking about Ronald McNair. Comes from such a humble background
Yes,
and just seemed like such a humble person throughout his entire life. And you have written that story so beautifully. Those last
thank you.
lines, they're just fantastic. And I'm looking forward to seeing this come to fruition in life through illustration too. Everybody has a unique story. Some stories get a lot of light. Others don't. They remain in the shadows. You have done such a beautiful job with your books of bringing people out of the shadows and ensuring they have those light and that light. And you clearly, as a children's book author, you have to select certain things to include in the books.
Yes,
I mean, they could have a huge life story. But how do you fit all of that in a 32-page book? And we're not asking students to write a 32-page book here, but what suggestions would you give to our student groups who are going to be working on this? To how do they narrow down what to include to be able to capture this person's story in such a short space? What's the process you go through to do that?
That goes back to finding the heart of the story. And I'm going to, if I may, hold this up. In this book, The Oldest Student, this lady lived 121 years. And it was just impossible to put her entire life into one book. So once I found the heart of her story, which was You're Never Too Old to Learn and Perseverance, then I knew what to put in what we call the back matter, which is important details that don't fit into the story. I knew that this story was going to focus on perseverance, the things she had to put on the back burner because she was trying to really survive and take care of her family. So the portions about slavery, Reconstruction, other things that were going on, I put those in the back of the book. So for these students, once they know the heart of their story, then they're going to focus on the information that uh, amplifies the heart of the story. Let's say again, maybe the story is courage. Maybe they're finding instances that these personalities showed great courage. Yeah. So they can amplify those, place those in the story, and then other details, other minute details, and maybe not so minute, can go into the back matter.
Yeah, capturing that story. With these, especially Medal of Honor recipients, some are awarded fairly quickly.
Yes.
Some are awarded posthumously. Some aren't awarded until decades later. Right. I mean, take Captain Larry Taylor or Jim McLuhan. They're not awarded till decades later, and they've lived a full life after that. And so maybe it's not just capturing their Medal of Honor action. Right. That can be part of the story. But some of these recipients have just done amazing things afterwards. I mean, a teacher, McLuhan, over 30 years of teaching and didn't know he was a Medal of Honor recipient. It was awarded only a few years ago. You've got Medal of Honor recipient Dwight Birdwell. Lived a full life. I was just awarded a few years ago for his actions in Vietnam, but he essentially sat on the Supreme Court of the Cherokee Nation. I mean, there's so many different things that they do throughout their life that can be highlighted. It doesn't have to just be the action, right? But those things also help capture that human. Who was this person, and what did they do after that one moment when they made that decision on the battlefield? What have they done the rest of their life? What did they do before that? What does that look like? And we definitely want students to consider that as part of the story, right?
Absolutely. And just what you've described, that shows me that those recipients weren't looking for notoriety. They weren't looking for fame. They did what they did, and then they moved on with their life and continued doing good things. So that's even a part of the heart of a story. If you were looking for the heart, that's part of the heart. So
part of the story. And some of these citations depends on, who it is. You go back to Civil War time frame. I mean, the citation may be one line. Right. You come to more present day, and it could be a solid paragraph. So students are obviously going to have to narrow down who they want to include. What would you suggest for them to, as they're scanning through the 3,500 Medal of Honor recipients, and then you've got multiple Space Medal of Honor recipients, what would you suggest for them how they could narrow that down? I mean, some of them may already have, branches of service interest, and then that narrows it down. Those who are interested in the Coast Guard, you have one, Douglas Monroe, to select from. So that narrows it quite quickly for you. But obviously these other branches have multiple Medal of Honor recipients. How would you suggest narrowing it down? How would you do that for these students? Because, they're in a group. There's going to be lots of interest out of 2, 3, 4 students that are involved in these groups. How would you suggest narrowing this down?
Well, maybe each member of the group could take so many stories to read. This person is responsible for reading these 5 stories, and this person is responsible for those, however many people are in the group. But then at a certain time, let everybody present just one out of that group that they read that really spoke to them. And they can say, I think we should write about this person because whatever the reason is. But um, let everybody find somebody that speaks to them instead of, well, you can scan. You're going to have to
Yeah.
because you're on a time limit. But I would probably split up that group and say, this person read this many stories and tell us who out of all of those stories really speaks to you, and then go from there. The final decision may come down to drawing straws. I don't know.
Yeah.
Once you've got 5 people's presentations of who they absolutely love, who spoke to them, you might come down to drawing straws somehow. But I would kind of narrow it down that way instead of everybody trying to read or scan every story, because that's going to take quite a bit of time. 3,500
That's
is
a lot.
lot of stories.
That's a
Yeah.
lot of stories.
So you want to narrow that down from the beginning. But I would, if I were judging this, would love to hear what each individual person comes up with and why.
Yeah.
Why out of these 10 people you read, why did this person speak to you?
Yeah.
That's at least a start, and it cuts down.
Because if it's a why you can latch onto, right? Then
Yes.
there's more passion in it.
Yes.
You're going to want to put more time and effort into it and what that looks like. So there's lots of tools that students can use these days to write things. Why is it important to, rather than just latching on immediately to AI to help with these things, why is it important to bring your own voice to a story?
Because everybody's voice is individual. This probably is going to take a lot longer than we have today, but I have a lot of editors who, when they read my work, says, I knew that was you before I even saw the name on it because you write a certain way. AI only scrapes the internet and finds whatever it finds and just kind of spins it. And there's may not be a lot of vibrancy. That's a matter of debate, but there may not be a lot of vibrancy, but try your hand. You never know. Sometimes you begin writing and the character, the personality takes over, and it's almost like you're channeling them and they're telling you what to write. I will give you a perfect example. In my book, Hammering for Freedom, that man's name was William Lewis. I'm not a descendant of William Lewis. I saw his picture in the newspaper one day, and I started researching him, and I knew that he rented himself so that he could set his entire family free. And I knew all the details, but I didn't really know the man. And I just looked at that picture, and in my mind, I said, well, William, what would you want me to tell people? And it's like I could hear him saying, tell them that I love my family. And that's why I think he did what he did. So I think each person should try their hand. You never know. The story may begin to write itself. You're using the pen, but the story may just start coming out. And you will see a total difference between your writing and something that can scrape the internet for what's already out there. AI can't create anything. It can just go find what's already been created and then kind of regroup it for you.
And I think that's important when, students have such a great opportunity to build their own unique brand, right? To craft their own voice. And that's why we want to give this opportunity. Take your own unique voice. You have your experiences. You have, life experiences that other people may not have experienced the same thing. Take all of that and bring that to the story by also doing your research of these recipients, right? And helping tell their story.
Yes.
And I think that that's a way to build your own brand as a writer. And maybe students don't all want to become writers, but if you're going to school, you're going to college, you're going to do anything in life, you're going to have to write here and there. It's very important, right?
Yes.
Reading and writing. So we want to be exposing students to these types of tasks, and this is a good way to practice it.
Absolutely.
Especially with America 250 coming up, and here it is. How can we tell our American story? And maybe bringing light to some of these recipients that, yes, they've been recognized as a recipient, Medal of Honor, Space Medal of Honor recipient, But what's more of their story? How can we shine
Yes.
more light on their stories? Because there's a lot from the Civil War who people just don't know a lot about.
Right.
So that would certainly take a lot more digging to do to figure out who these people are. But there's just so many amazing stories there that we want to highlight that, yes, again, they've been highlighted in their own way because they are recipients, but there's so much that's left out of their story that isn't
Absolutely.
in that one-line citation.
Absolutely. And I would like to say to everybody, be prepared to be inspired. When I read some of these stories, I'm a little embarrassed because I feel like I've been a little lax. I see what these people, where they came from, what they've been through, what they gave back to society, and I'm just inspired. I'm thinking I need to be doing more. So I'll tell everyone, be prepared. You're going to be inspired.
So these students, they've got multiple performance tasks they're going to be doing. Clearly,
Yes.
one of them is a little short story on a recipient. But they might be fired up from the get-go, and then sometimes energy can wane.
Yes.
How do you stay engaged with your stories that you're involved in? How do you keep yourself mentally focused? You're having to do some research, you're having to go back and forth between some writing and back and forth. How do you stay focused on completing the project at hand?
Well, first of all, it depends on your timeline. My timeline is a little bit different from what these children will be facing. But for instance, if I have a timeline of, if I've given myself a timeline of, say, 6 months, I'm doing that because sometimes you do get a little overwhelmed with your juggling life, you're juggling um, ideas. And then as a writer, what you discover is that you like writing about everything. So you're in the middle of this and you run across something new and you want to start it, but you're still working on this. So what I do is I have a 3-ring binder that I call my greenhouse. And I put ideas that I may be working on them right now, but if I'm drawing a blank, I'm not doing the story or myself any good. So I may say, I'm going to put this down for 2 days and I'll come back. So I put everything in my binder and I move on to something else, whether it's a writing exercise, whether it's taking a walk, clearing my mind. But then I return to what I'm working on. And I try not to let anything else interfere with my writing. And by that, I mean, I don't mean outside like the telephone or people. I mean ideas that come while you're working on this idea. That's when the creative muse wants to show up and say, tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you should be doing this. I try to put all of that aside. I'll write it down. I'll write down whatever my new idea is, put it in my greenhouse, and then go back and refocus on my story so that I can get that story done. I will say, in the oldest student, I think I was gathering information on this story, but not as a primary. I was actually working on another book, and I kept running into this lady's story in the newspapers and old books. I put it in my greenhouse, finished what I was doing. Then I came back and I said, okay, it's time. She keeps telling me to write her story. I'm about to go write her story. So my my advice is if you're becoming overwhelmed and you need to take a little vacation from your story, do so. Give yourself a day or two, depending on your deadline. And then try to tell yourself, I'm going to finish this project. Now, you might have to write an outline and do a little checklist to make sure you've gotten all your things taken care of. But I would tell them, take a little break. Don't beat yourself up if you need to take a break from what you're doing and explore some other things. But mind your deadline and mind your checklist if you have one. And eventually you're going to make it to the end, and I bet it's going to be fantastic.
So through this design challenge, we've been exposing students to just various different careers. Clearly, you've made a career of writing. You're a award-winning children's book author. What advice would you give to students who are maybe interested in pursuing this pathway, or maybe they're kind of just want to dip their toe in a little bit? What advice would you give to them?
Okay, once you realize you have an interest in writing, even if you haven't decided that's going to be your career, once you know you have an interest, remember all the resources that we have. We have Twitter, we have Facebook, X and Facebook and Instagram. I would take advantage of those resources. And here's what I mean. On Facebook um, alone, there are so many free writing resources. There, one I can think of right now is called Kidlit 411.
Mm-hmm.
Kidlit 411. That's where you go to share your story with other writers. Now you have to read their story and give your opinion, but they will read your story, give their opinion. So find your tribe, they call it finding your people or your tribe. Find other writers your age who maybe write what you write or something similar, and share your stories with them. Learn how people are handling, learn what's trending, and then learn how writers are handling those stories, and then go from there. You can meet so many authors on Facebook. I'm one of them. And what you'll find, especially in the Kidlit area, is authors are so generous.
Mm-hmm.
I just took on a mentee this year. She's in Texas, but I just took on a picture book mentee who has always dreamed of writing a picture book. So they're so generous. Someone will take you under their wing and show you the ropes. Now, you may find out you don't like the ropes and you don't want to do it, but the resources are there. So do a little digging. Almost everybody now knows how to um, search the internet and find what they want. So do a little digging on people who write what you write and go from there. Reach out. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid. Reach out. You wouldn't believe how many emails I get a week of people saying, "Hi, I'm from this state and I'm a writer and I've always wanted to do this." Now, I can't help everybody, but I do point them in the right direction if I can't help them.
Yeah. Oh, so just ask, right?
Just ask.
Now,
Yes.
as you were saying that, my mind immediately went to intellectual theft and
Yeah.
just being cautious of who they're reaching out to. But some of those groups you can get into definitely are
Yeah.
they're real people.
Let me speak to intellectual theft. I'm sure it happens.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard of it, but every writer writes differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to be a book reviewer. I've reviewed for over 20 years for major trade publishers. You wouldn't believe how many books were all about the same thing, but they were totally different. Young girls who want to be a princess, or princesses who strap on a tool belt. I mean, everybody had a story at one time about princesses. Everybody had one about dragons. So they were the same thing, but they really weren't, depending on how the writer writes and how they treated the subject. Remember, finding the heart of your story. So I'm not saying that doesn't happen, intellectual theft. Of course, be careful, especially if you've written a story and you're sending your whole story to somebody. Yeah. But ideas can't be copyrighted. There's so many people with the same ideas. Yeah. So I would say don't be so afraid to share your work that nobody ever sees it. Yeah. Because most people, I'll tell you, I have 45 stories at home waiting to be finished. I don't have time to take anybody's story. So most writers will tell you, I don't have time to take your story. Yeah. So, I mean, be careful, but don't be so careful that your work never gets out there to anyone. Yeah. That's not going to help anybody.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up being a book reviewer. Were there certain things that you were looking for or that stood out or were unique as their student groups are writing this short story, right? Is there something as a book reviewer you would have been looking for to make it unique that maybe they could think about incorporating as they write these short stories?
Well, I love a range of books, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer your story, but well, first of all, I like a clever story with an unexpected twist at the end. I loved humor. You can even write nonfiction with a little bit of humor in it. I was always looking for something that made me smile a little bit. Um, I I was always looking for stories that, for some reason, they had been either forgotten, swept under the rug, or whatever, and it would make me want to give that person in the story their 15 minutes of fame. So I've just always looked for something that speaks to me or makes me smile. I do like to smile. I know every story is not funny,
Mm-hmm.
but they may have a little bit of humor in there. So, yeah.
Because they're real people. And,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know, and just like Ellison Onizuka, a Space Medal of Honor recipient who was a board challenger, um, told jokes. Like that was
Yes.
part of his personality. So latching on, seeing what you can find about
Yes.
these individuals' personalities, like, you know, our country is made of so many different backgrounds and ethnicities and personalities, and it's I think by doing this we'll be able to show students be able to doing this, selecting someone to be able to bring all those personalities, to put a light on all of them and what they did and their talents and their you know, deep down all the courage that they all exhibit. And I think students are going to be able to do this, and they can do it, as what
Yeah.
we're hearing, in a fun, creative way.
Yes.
You know, learning, writing can be both reflective and fun at the same time. So how can we capture that in that way?
Absolutely. I want to say one more thing. Like you mentioned, Ellison Onizuka. Okay, think about opening a article, short story about him with a joke. I don't know what kind of jokes he told, but what if it was a knock knock joke?
Uh-huh.
And you opened up with that knock knock joke. People are going to be totally surprised when you follow that with that was Ellison's way. He
Uh-huh.
liked to tell jokes, but he also loved the thought of space. That's a different way of telling a story, and that hook of, because how many people try to tell a joke?
Yeah.
So many. That's that hook that will grab a reader's attention. It would have grabbed mine. I would have thought, who's telling this knock knock joke? And then I read this man who's really an astronaut and a joker, but an astronaut. So find a creative way. It doesn't always have to be humorous, again, but a creative way of highlighting that person's personality
Yeah.
and go from there. It is truly a journey, but I would probably suggest for the more mature or the older writer to find an agent. You want to join some of these groups. There are writing groups that are paid groups and there are free groups. But in most of these groups, free or paid, they will always tell you of the new agents that are coming up, who most of the new ones are building their list. So those new ones are looking for people. Yeah. And they'll tell you, I'm looking for this type of story, I'm looking for a space story, I'm looking for humor. And then you want to try to get your story in front of them, you need a critique group. Mm-hmm. You should never assume that whatever you've written is ready to go. Get into a critique group. Your partners in the group will tell you, I don't know what you're talking about. I've had that people tell me that, or they'll say, this is so amazing. This is an amazing story. But you want to get it in front of other people, and you want to polish it until it shines before you send it to an agent. And then once you get an agent, that agent has the network to be, they know who's buying what, and they'll get your story out there. Now, whether that's going to translate to the children doing this challenge, it may be a little premature.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's still important, though. I mean, because, you know, this challenge is kind of like maybe a dipping the toe in the water for these young writers.
Yes.
And so, you know, maybe they latch on to this. They want to write more stories, and maybe they want to make a career out of this. And, you know, not every student's growing up thinking, I want to be a children's book author. I mean, sure, you started out young writing, but was that the immediate, I'm going to be a children's book author? Or did you did you eventually get there?
Well, I didn't know that there were different classifications of writers. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but I thought it was just all one big clump. I only found out later, after I became a teacher, that I wanted to write for children because they were just starting out in life, and you can really make a big impression that way. But no, I just started out writing everything I could get my hands on. Poetry. I still remember one of my poems that I wrote. I think I was like 8 or 9 years old, and it was a Christmas poem, but it won an award. There was no money attached, but it won an award when I was 8. So um, there may be some writers out there. There are always, every time I go into the schools or the classrooms, and I ask, are there any writers in here? Hardly anybody will raise their hand. But after a class, and I'm thinking I'm about to go to my next assignment, there are 30 children up there saying, well, I wrote this. Well, can you look at that? So, there are so many writers out there just waiting to be encouraged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A number of these people that we've interviewed for these design challenge have, many of them said, I didn't start out doing this.
Right.
I started out here, and then I went to here, and then I went to here, and here I am now. And all of those skills that I accumulated in those other positions, they've helped bring more flavor to what I do now. They've informed what I do now. How has being a teacher informed your writing?
Oh, in so many ways, I may not be able to mention all of them, but one of the first things I noticed as a teacher was I was looking for certain concepts to share with the students. And when we went to the library, the books weren't there. And I'm thinking, well, where are the books? Well, they weren't there. They were waiting for me to write some of them. So that's the first thing I noticed was what was in the library, what wasn't there. Then I began to learn about the different age groups. Um, some of my earliest students were K through 3, and that is age 5 through 8. And what was important to them, which really was being accepted and having friends was important to them. And once I learned what was important to them and what was funny to them, for some reason, the phrase happy stack, they would come in the morning and say, I had a happy stack this morning. And I would say, well, what in the world is that? Well, that's a stack of pancakes, but they called it a happy stack. Just little silly things that those children identified with. And then once I moved to middle school, most of the other things I had learned were irrelevant. They didn't fit because middle schoolers were just starting to like girls or boys, and they were just starting to go to parties, and they wanted to know how to converse with the older ages. So school taught me personalities. It taught me the different, I guess, milestones that happens in a child's life. And that helped me to focus. That's why I said earlier, always know who your audience is, who you're writing for. If it's the younger kids, make the vocabulary fit, make the topic fit. The topic may just be about meeting friends and belonging.
Yeah.
If it's older kids, you know what the topic is about. Somebody likes a girl, but they don't want everybody to know they like a girl. That sort of thing.